Well, I think including student ministry, student pastorates, I think this year, if I'm counting right, is my 30th year. And so that means that there are 30 times as pastor of a church where we've gotten to Transfiguration Sunday. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know really any more about it today than I did 30 years ago. And the truth is, neither do you. I mean, we know the details that are given to us in the gospel accounts, and it is in the three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but we don't really understand what happened. So let's just get that out of the way from the beginning. I don't have a clue exactly what happened, except that this was one of those occasions in Jesus' life where there was some kind of confirming experience from the Father to the Son, from God to Jesus, that allowed Jesus to realize anew, again, and maybe even in a different way, that he was on the right pathway, that he was on the right mission, that he was doing things as he was supposed to do. Now the Gospels, they don't give us a history of Jesus. They give us pictures of things that happened in Jesus' life, events that the writers believed were significant enough to repeat and to remember. And so there's no doubt that the three writers believe that this story of Jesus' transfiguration was an important one. And it was one of those events, like at Jesus' baptism and at other times, when Jesus got that confirming word from God. And this is one of those occasions where others heard that confirming word. The voice from the cloud or from the light that said, "This is my Son, the beloved. I'm pleased with him. He's doing what I sent him to do. Pay attention to what he says." Now, what happened, I don't have a clue. That word transfiguration is a word that I bet you've never used in any context other than this gospel story. The Greek word, as I said to the children, is the word metamorphosis. Most of us have heard that word. We heard it maybe even as far back as elementary school in life sciences, where a caterpillar or something like that changes into a butterfly, the process of becoming another thing than what you used to be. That's the word, and it's an old Greek word. In fact, it's an important word in ancient times. It's used by even someone like Aristotle. Because the ancients believed that there's a stuff that we're made of. You know, we look different, we're different heights, we're different widths, we're different weights, our hair color is different, the amount of hair we have. All of those things may be different between us as individuals, but there's still something that makes us the same. That's our humanity. We are substantively human. So if something could happen that would make us change from what we are into something else, that would be a metamorphosis. And it's on that ancient science that the belief in the Middle Ages came about, that if you could figure the right combination of things, if you could figure the right formula, you could do what the alchemists wanted to do. You could change lead into gold. And people used to try to do that. Well, we know that's not true now, but back then, that's what they believed. And the idea is that some things can undergo such a transformation that they completely cease to be what they were, and they become something altogether different. Is that what happened to Jesus? Not really. For a brief moment, something happened, but then all of a sudden, everything was back the way it was before. Now, we don't know why the story isn't included necessarily, except this. As I said, I believe it was one of those confirming moments in Jesus' life, because Luke's gospel, in his telling of the story, says that right after this, right after the transfiguration, Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. That's Luke's way of telling us that Jesus was entering into a phase of his ministry that he knew would get him to a place where those who were against him would finally have the power to have him arrested, have him executed, and hopefully put a stop to it. Now, that was a difficult mission. We celebrate Transfiguration Sunday, or at least we acknowledge it, every single year, the last Sunday before the start of Lent. Because our Lenten journey is a journey where we too go with Jesus to Jerusalem, to the cross, and then to Easter. It's a spiritual exercise. And so the remembering of Transfiguration Sunday is rather like that too. The disciples, Peter, James, and John, the inner core of the group of disciples, did what they sometimes do in the gospel accounts. They went with Jesus off for a special time. And so they were up on the mountain, and all of a sudden, Jesus is transfigured before their very eyes. And it's frightening and exciting to them. And then all of a sudden, they see a vision of Moses and Elijah there talking with Jesus. Now, I assume that they'd never seen them before, since they lived hundreds or thousands of years before Peter, James, and John. I've always wondered, how did they know that it was Moses and Elijah? I don't know the answer to that. And I don't understand how this story, if other than just taking the story as it's given to us, I don't know what happened to Jesus, except that he changed. And all of a sudden, Jesus was different. He shone with a kind of glory that reflected God in a way that every day he didn't do. And I believe that it was one of those moments that Jesus needed in his ministry, so that when he came down off the mountain, he was ready to do what he knew God was leading him to do, and that is to head toward Jerusalem. And that ultimately, of course, would mean that he was rejected, despised, beaten, killed, and ultimately, of course, raised. But the disciples didn't know what to do with it either. And that's kind of where I want to focus a little bit this morning. And that's on Peter, James, and John and their response. Well, you know Peter, when the others aren't going to talk, he's going to. Whenever there's something to be said or to be said better, Peter's the one who always ends up speaking up, and more times than not, he sticks his foot in his mouth. He means well, but he still doesn't get it right. So he said, Jesus, what a wonderful thing this is that's happened, even though I don't have a clue what it was. I don't understand, don't know, but it's a wonderful thing that's happened. So let me build 3 tents, or 3 little monuments, one for you, one for Elijah, one for Moses, so that there will be a memorial of this wonderful thing that's happened right before our very eyes. And Jesus looked at him and said, no. Peter was like that, though. He didn't know any more than I do or you do exactly what happened to Jesus that day, except that it got him excited, and he wanted to live in that moment. He wanted to relish that moment as long as he possibly could. Now, I bet something like that has happened to you and I before. There have been moments in life, Kodak moments, Polaroid moments, significant moments, that we wish would just keep right on going. Things that are out of the ordinary for us. It's not something that happens every day. But we have those significant events from time to time, and we wish that they would go on forever. They keep lasting, and we wouldn't have to go back to normal life like we were before. But then, of course, we have to go back to normal life. So Peter wants to remember this, relish it, and even continue to live in it. But he can't, because they're coming down off that mountain, and Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem. And that's not something Peter wanted to do. You remember when Jesus, very close in time to this, when Jesus asked the disciples, who do you say that I, the Son of Man, am? And Jesus said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Peter is happy because Jesus affirmed Peter and says, "You didn't come up with that on your own. God revealed it to you. Congratulations, you got it exactly right." But Peter, being Peter, couldn't shut up and stop right there. He had to go on because immediately Jesus said, "We're going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to die there." And Peter had to correct Jesus and say, "No, that's not going to happen. You're just not seeing things right. We're not going to let that happen. You're not going to die." And Jesus rebukes him and says, "Get behind me. You are embodying Satan at the moment. You don't understand." Peter wanted to live in that high time. He wanted to live in that good time. He didn't want to go back to life as it was, and certainly didn't want to do what Jesus said was about to happen, and that is that I'm going to head toward Jerusalem, and along the way we're going to make a lot of enemies. And before all is said and done, they're going to take me out, and they're going to crucify me. That's not what Peter wanted. That's not what you and I would have wanted. So Peter wanted to dwell in the moment, and Jesus has to correct him and say, "No, that's not what this journey is all about. It's not about the high life. It's not about the wonderful times. It's about the everyday nitty-gritty of living." That's what we've got to get back to. And I've been thinking about that a lot this week. I'm sure you've seen the stories too, that on the Asbury campus in Kentucky, Asbury University, something of a revival has broken out. It started rather spontaneously. Some people gathered in the chapel, and after the service was over for that day, they didn't leave. They began to pray, and they began to sing, and before you know it, more and more people were coming. It was completely unstructured, unplanned, and at the last thing I saw on it, that there were like 3,000 people who were waiting to have their moment to get inside the chapel to experience a little bit of it. That's a revival. Same thing's happening at other colleges. The latest one that I saw was Samford University, another religious school, where a similar revival has broken out now in that place. Don't be surprised if you don't see it happening in other places as well, because sometimes it happens. And it's a good thing. It's a very good thing for them, or can be, because in having a revival, they become aware of God on a different, more deep level than they've experienced before. And it can be literally life-changing, but the temptation is always, let's keep it going just like it is. Let's not have to get back out into the ordinary nitty-gritty of life. And that's when a revival can become a bad thing, a dangerous thing. If you studied American history, you know that there have been several times in our nation's history where there have been what have been called Great Awakenings. Some historians say that there have been 4, maybe even 5 of them. There have been at least 2 that we know of for sure. The second one was in the early years of this country, early 1800s, and revival began to break out all across the country. Famed preachers like George Whitefield and others traveled a circuit, and they held revivals. Charles Finney and others, and they began to preach, and people began to respond. And the truth of the matter is, in that 20 or so year period of the Second Great Awakening, the early 1800s, something like 30% of the nation's population began to have a religious persuasion for the first time. When the Revolutionary War was over, less than 3% of the people of this country were in church. The Great Revival, the second one, helped change that. And it was a significant thing. It was in that Great Revival that the Methodist movement really began to take off. The Baptist church did too, so did the Presbyterians. It was in that movement that other denominations were born. They began to emphasize certain distinctives and started new movements. And so overall, it was a good thing, but it also had its bad side. That there was a part of western New York that has come to be known as the burned over district. That there were so many revivals, preachers going through there and having revivals that the people literally got burned on religion, if you will. And in order to do better than the last preacher that came through, they became more enthusiastic. They got more excited. They did different things, contrived things to try to make it better than the last one. And that burned over district is where a lot of movements came from, because they were filled up with so many contradictory experiences of religion that they decided, a lot of them, just to go out and start their own. The Seventh-day Adventists came from there. Jehovah's Witnesses, ultimately, though a little bit later, came from there. The Shakers came from there. Free love societies started there. The Mormons began their movement there. All of them because they had been filled up with so much religion that they didn't know what to do with it. And they wanted it to last. They wanted it to last like it had been lasting. And so in order to do that, some of them just went out and started their own movements. Now, surely they believed that God was behind that, even if we don't believe that God was behind all of it. But that's like Peter was. Peter wanted this moment to last and last and last and last, and it doesn't. A revival can take place anywhere, but once the revival has taken place, it's time to get back to the ordinary, to do the work of the kingdom. That's what Jesus did. Jesus experienced a highlight moment, if you will, of his ministry when he was transfigured. He shone with God's glory. But once that moment was over, what did he have to do? He had to set his face toward Jerusalem. That's what we have to do too. There are those moments, we're going to have them, and they're good things. To have those moments of revival and have those moments of new focus. But when that's over with, we've got to get back to doing the work of the kingdom. And hopefully we can do it with a new approach, a new attitude, with a new kind of love, but still we have to be about the work of the kingdom. That's our job. Revival can take place here, if we're willing to receive it. Revival can take place at any church, any school, and it's a wonderful thing. But when it's done, it's time to go back to work. And ultimately, that's what we're here to do the work of the kingdom. To share God's love in many different ways, through our men going to the Habitat House, to meals taken to shut-ins, to inviting someone else to come to church with us because we know that it's important. That's what the everyday work of the kingdom is. It's not the highlight. It's not the feeling good. It's not the wondrous moments. It's the everyday nitty-gritty of life. We're here to do that work. As we begin that Lenten journey ourselves, as we set our face toward Jerusalem this week, let's remember that. That we too go with Jesus to Jerusalem. And we are obedient when we do what he commands us to do. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.